Hi, my name is Harper Moore. I am 27 years old, and I have just completed my Master of Business Administration at Stanford. That evening, I slipped into a deep blue dress and walked into an upscale restaurant in the heart of Palo Alto, where golden lights shimmered across tables draped in spotless white linens. Crystal glasses gleamed in perfect rows under the glow, and red wine swirled like it was waiting to be lifted for a toast. This was supposed to be my night, a celebration of a milestone earned through years of juggling work and study, through countless sleepless nights buried in reports, and long days running back and forth between classrooms and the office. But when my parents arrived, later than everyone else, I immediately realized my expectations had been misplaced. They sat down without a smile, without a word of congratulations, and instead of acknowledging the MBA I had just earned, they turned the conversation toward Elisa, my younger sister, the only pride they seemed to carry in their hearts. A few colleagues, polite and encouraging, leaned over and said, "You must be so proud that Harper graduated from Stanford with an MBA. Not many people can achieve that." But my parents responded only with thin smiles and dismissive remarks that froze the air around the table. I sat there, forcing my smile to stay in place, while inside the pieces of me were cutting deeper. Then the moment came that I will never forget. My father, his face flushed red, slammed his hand against the table and shouted, "Paying the bills doesn't make you family." My mother whispered just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "You're only jealous of your sister." I lifted my head, gave a cold smile, and answered with a short reply that changed everything. "Then let her pay for it." In an instant, every gaze turned toward me, friends wide-eyed, colleagues stunned, while my father roared, "Get out," throwing me out of my own celebration. That night, I understood that I had just been disowned. But in that very moment, I also chose to disown them in a way they could never have anticipated. Have you ever felt humiliated by your own family on the most important day of your life, only to be forced to realize that blood ties do not always equal love? If you have, tell me where you are listening to this story from, so I know I am not alone. Before that graduation dinner turned into a nightmare, my life had already been years of carrying the entire family on my back. For the past 5 years, I worked and studied at the same time, not out of passion or some grand ambition, but because I simply had no other choice. My family needed money, and I was the only daughter willing to do everything it took to keep the lights on, to make sure my parents never had to worry about losing their insurance, and to allow my younger sister Elisa to live up to the precious jewel image they always placed her on. I remember my first days as a junior financial consultant at a firm in San Francisco. The starting salary was not impressive compared to my classmates, but to me, it was hope. Each paycheck, I divided immediately into portions. The largest part, nearly 2/3 of it, went straight to my parents. That money covered the mortgage, the electricity, the water, the gas, the internet, all the bills they had grown accustomed to letting me handle. Health insurance for the whole family also came from my account, because my parents always said insurance in America was too expensive, that they couldn't possibly afford it. I set up automatic payments, and month after month, over $2,500 slipped out of my account like clockwork, to the point that I no longer remembered the exact day I had signed those authorizations. As the years went on, the amount of money only grew, especially once Elisa entered college. My sister chose law, a field my parents constantly praised. This is the real profession, prestigious, with a future, with status. While I buried myself in the office of a financial consulting firm, nights ending with me alone in front of an Excel screen until midnight, Elisa paraded around in gowns at social events, flaunted weekend getaways with friends, all paid for by the money I sent home. I remember clearly one time, when her tuition bill was due, my mother called with an irritated tone. "Harper, transfer the money quickly. She needs to submit it by Friday." She cannot fall behind her friends just because her sister failed to support her on time. There was no thank you, no encouragement, only pressure and responsibility handed down to me as if it were my unquestionable duty. And it seemed that in my parents' eyes, nothing I did was ever enough. I still remember vividly one evening in the living room. I had just come back from work, exhausted, my face pale from the long day, and my father, sitting comfortably with his newspaper, glanced at me with indifference before saying, "What's so great about financial consulting? You just crunch numbers and write reports. How could that ever compare to a lawyer or a doctor?" I stayed silent. I did not argue, because deep down all I wanted was their recognition, for them to see that I was doing my best. But instead, all I received were dismissive shrugs and condescending words. Some memories cut so deeply that even now, whenever I think about them, my chest tightens. When I turned 25, my birthday happened to fall right in the middle of Elisa's exam season. The entire family completely forgot. I came home after work to find a cold, empty kitchen, not a single card, not even a simple happy birthday. My mother was busy preparing late-night snacks for Elisa, while my father spoke enthusiastically about my sister's bright future. I sat alone in my room, eating a leftover cookie from the office, quietly singing happy birthday to myself. Just a few weeks later, Elisa's birthday was celebrated with a lavish party of more than 50 guests, sparklers lighting up the backyard, and a full rented sound system. I stood silently in the corner, holding a glass of water, listening as everyone cheered for my sister. And in that moment, I wondered to myself, does anyone here know who paid for every light, every dish, every flower at this party? Strangely enough, even while being forgotten, I kept on paying. Part of it was because I loved my sister. Part of it was because I feared the disappointed look in my parents' eyes, and the rest, perhaps, was because I wanted to prove that I had value even if that value was measured only in the numbers on a bank statement. I threw myself into work, took on extra projects, stayed late in the office, and even passed up opportunities for myself just to make sure that every month my family continued living comfortably. I remember once being so sick with a fever that I was shaking, yet I still dragged myself to the office to finish a report, because I knew if I missed work, I wouldn't earn enough overtime to send money home. No one from my family called to check on me. The only message I received was from my mother. "Don't forget to transfer the car insurance payment this month." I had tried to seek closeness before. Once, I invited my mother out for lunch, hoping for a warm, genuine conversation. But throughout the meal, she spoke only about Elisa's future plans, from her upcoming internship at the courthouse to the new car she wanted to buy. When I tried to share about my first successful project at work, my mother nodded absent-mindedly before quickly changing the subject. That feeling of being pushed to the sidelines tightened in my throat, and I realized that even while sitting right across from her, I was invisible. During those years, I learned how to endure. I told myself that one day, when I earned my MBA from Stanford, my parents would finally have to acknowledge me. I hoped that degree would be undeniable proof that I was worthy too. But deep down, I also knew there were no guarantees. Because if 5 years of carrying the family, paying over $30,000 a year, was still not enough for them to see me, then perhaps nothing ever would be. I lived in that silence, gritting my teeth and moving forward, because I wasn't ready to face the truth, not ready to ask myself, was I really a member of this family or just a walking wallet? And so, all those memories, all those years of silence and dismissal, came crashing down like a tidal wave, erupting at my graduation dinner, the very place where I finally understood the truth. In my parents' eyes, every sacrifice I had made was not even worth a single word of thanks. The decision to host a dinner was never about extravagance or vanity, as they so often assumed. I only wanted one night to mark my own achievement, an evening where the people who had truly walked beside me, my friends, my colleagues, my professors, could raise a glass together in celebration. After 5 years of carrying the weight of my family and pushing myself through endless study, I believed I deserved at least one moment that could belong solely to me. I spent an entire week searching for the right venue. In the end, I chose a small Italian restaurant on the main street of Palo Alto, where string lights twinkled like little stars, rustic brick walls gave warmth, and wide glass windows opened onto a stone-paved patio. It wasn't overcrowded, but it carried just enough elegance to make every guest feel valued. I didn't hire any flashy event service, didn't make a spectacle. I called the restaurant myself, reserved the tables, worked directly with the chef on the menu, even sat for hours considering each dish so it would suit everyone, including my vegetarian colleagues. I wanted everything to be thoughtful because I have always believed that small details make the difference. That was my way of showing respect to the people who came to celebrate with me. My guest list was modest. I invited my close friends from the MBA program, those who knew every drop of sweat that had gone into my journey. I invited my direct manager and a few colleagues from the consulting firm, the ones who had shielded me on the days I could barely stand. I made sure to send invitations to 2 professors who had always believed in me, even if I knew their schedules were busy. And of course, I sent invitations to my parents and my sister. Despite the doubt that weighed heavy inside me, I still wanted them there. I wanted to believe that this time, they would sit in that room and look at me with pride at least once. I still remember the moment I sent the message to our family group chat, "I've reserved a small dinner to celebrate my graduation. I really hope you can come, because this day means so much to me." My heart raced as I waited for a reply. A few minutes later, my mother responded with a single line. "Don't make it such a fuss, no need to celebrate a trivial degree." I read that message over and over, and a heaviness settled in my chest. Just one sentence, but it was enough to strangle the excitement I had been building. It wasn't the first time I had been met with such coldness, but in that moment, it felt like an omen, a shadow of the storm that was about to come. I bit my lip, set the phone down, and forced myself to continue. "It's fine, this dinner is mine, whether they come or not, I still deserve to celebrate." The following days, I threw myself into preparations. I stopped by the florist to choose bright yellow sunflowers and tulips, the flowers I've always loved for the warmth and hope they bring. I went to the bakery and ordered a simple tiramisu, not flashy but elegant. I bought a deep blue dress that fit perfectly, refined without being too showy, because I wanted the night to focus on the story and the journey, not my appearance. In my small apartment, I stayed up late writing thank you cards for each guest, filling them with words from the heart so that my friends and colleagues would know just how deeply I valued their presence. Every so often, as I prepared, I found myself wondering if my parents would notice the effort I had put in. I pictured them walking into the restaurant, hearing the applause of my friends and colleagues, then turning to smile proudly and say, "This is our daughter." I clung to that vision the way a child clings to a dream, ignoring all the proof from the past that such a moment would likely never come. I deceived myself, hoping for something that perhaps had never existed at all. The day before the dinner, I called my mother to confirm. She answered without a trace of excitement in her voice. "Yes, if we're not busy, your father and I might stop by. But don't expect much, you know. Elisa just got a job at the law firm, and that's the kind of thing really worth celebrating." I gripped the phone tightly, my hand trembling, but I still whispered back, "I understand." When I hung up, I sat there motionless, my heart sinking under its own weight. I wanted to cry, but I didn't let myself. I told myself that no matter what, I would walk into my own celebration with pride. That night, the Italian restaurant I had chosen glowed with warm golden light. Small candles flickered on every table, their flames mirrored in the crystal glasses, casting a luminous sheen across the room that felt both elegant and intimate. The background music was soft piano drifting from the corner, notes that were gentle yet carried a sense of ceremony. I stepped into the hall in my deep blue dress, the one I had chosen so carefully, and a thrill of anticipation ran down my spine. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the night I wanted to dedicate to marking the journey of the last 5 years. My friends arrived early. My MBA group rushed in, wrapping me in tight hugs, handing me a bouquet of bright sunflowers, the very flowers I love most. A colleague handed me a small, neatly wrapped gift box and said, "Harper, you've worked tirelessly. We're so proud of you." I smiled, and for once I felt seen. I felt recognized, a feeling I had never known within my own family. Laughter filled the air, glasses clinked together in cheerful toasts, and for a moment I thought, maybe tonight will be all right. Maybe, finally, my parents will be proud. But then, when the clock passed 8, my parents finally walked in. They arrived late, moving slowly with an air of formality. My father wore a dark suit, my mother a fitted black dress, their faces entirely devoid of smiles. They carried no flowers, no small gift. I hurried over to greet them, forcing a smile. "I'm glad you came." My mother only gave a slight nod, her eyes scanning the room as if to see who else was there, while my father pulled out a chair, sat down, and ordered wine without so much as looking at me. I told myself it was fine, as long as they were here. I turned back to my friends, continued welcoming the guests, and tried to let the evening unfold. Throughout the dinner, though, my parents spoke almost exclusively about Elisa. They boasted about how she had just landed a job at a prestigious law firm in San Francisco, how bright her future was, how she would soon become the pride of the entire family line. They emphasized every detail, from her starting salary to the names of the partners she might meet. My friends, polite and gracious, smiled and listened, but I could see the sympathetic glances, the quiet looks toward me as if to ask, "Are you okay?" I forced a smile and lifted my glass, my voice hoarse but steady as I said, "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with me. I'm truly grateful to have people who believe in me and support me, even when I struggle to believe in myself." Applause filled the room, but inside me, something cracked. I knew something was about to happen, and I knew this night would not end the way I had once imagined. In that moment, I glanced toward my parents. They sat upright, cold, their hands still, no applause, no proud glance in my direction. Beside them, Elisa sat with her arms crossed, her lips curled in a half-smile as though the victory was already hers. I drew in a long breath, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. A little later, one of my senior colleagues, a longtime mentor at the firm, walked over to the table where my parents sat. He smiled warmly and said, "You must be very proud of Harper, graduating with an MBA from Stanford. Not many people achieve something like that." I stood a few steps away, waiting silently, hoping just once to finally hear words of recognition. But my father only gave a faint laugh, shrugged, and replied, "The truth is, Harper is good at studying, but she hasn't done much to help this family. Compared to Elisa, it hardly means anything." The room seemed to freeze. My colleague looked briefly unsettled, forcing an awkward nod before steering the conversation elsewhere. I stood rooted to the spot, my heart sinking. Those words were not new. I had heard them before, but never had my father spoken them in front of others, right there in the middle of what was supposed to be my night. Years of endurance surged up inside me like a tidal wave, and I knew I could no longer stay silent. I drew a deep breath, my eyes rimmed red but unwavering, piercing straight through my parents. "Enough," I said, my voice calm but carrying, slicing through the silence of the room. "For the past 5 years, I've been working and studying, not because I had endless energy or wanted to show off, but because I carried this entire family on my back. I paid more than $30,000 a year, mortgage, utilities, insurance, even Elisa's tuition. I did all of it so my parents could live comfortably, so Elisa could smile without worry. But in return, all I received was silence, dismissive shrugs, whispered words that belittled me even on the very night I thought would finally be mine." The table fell utterly still. A few guests gasped, unable to hide their shock. One of my colleagues set down his glass, the sharp clink of crystal against wood echoing like a warning. I saw Elisa's eyes widen, while my mother stiffened in her chair, her face momentarily frozen. But the fiercest reaction came from my father. His face flushed crimson, his hands trembled as he gripped his glass, then he slammed his palm against the table so hard the silverware rattled. His voice thundered through the quiet room. "Paying the bills doesn't make you family." Those words cut into me like a blade, but at the same time they lit the fuse on all the anger I had kept buried. I heard a sharp intake of breath from someone nearby, and I knew everyone in the room had heard it too. I no longer trembled. Instead, I smiled a cold, steady smile I never knew I was capable of, and locked eyes with my father. "Then let her pay for it," I said. I tilted my head slightly toward Elisa, each word deliberate and clear, falling from my lips like a verdict that could never be taken back. The air turned to stone. I saw eyes widen in disbelief, a few relatives raising their hands to cover their mouths, and a young colleague turning to me with a look of shock mingled with admiration. Elisa sat frozen, her mouth open but no words coming out. My mother whispered, her voice trembling yet loud enough for the entire table to hear. "You're just jealous of your sister." Whether her voice shook from anger or from fear that the truth had been exposed in front of everyone, I couldn't tell. I drew in a long breath and replied, my voice steady, calm, and chillingly even. "Jealous? For the past 5 years, who is paid to make sure this family had a roof over its head, lights in every room, insurance when you were admitted to the hospital? Who has made it possible for Elisa to attend law school at a prestigious university? I am not jealous. I have sacrificed. And now, all I want is respect, something I can clearly see I will never receive from my parents." N6. The murmurs rose again, louder this time. My father, consumed by rage, roared, "Get out! Get out right now! This is no place for your theatrics." His shout startled the entire room. Even the waitstaff nearby froze, uncertain, their eyes darting around nervously. I straightened my back, picked up my purse, and not a single tear fell. I only bowed my head slightly and said, loud enough for all to hear, "Then I will do exactly as you want. I will leave. And from this moment on, do not expect me to carry another dime for this family." I turned my back and walked away, my steps slow but resolute. The sound of my heels striking the wooden floor echoed like the final drumbeats at the end of a symphony. Behind me, I heard the confused murmurs, the sound of people calling my name, even my mother's voice trying to stop something that had already gone too far. But it was too late. As I pushed open the restaurant door, the cool night air rushed in, and I knew that a chapter of my life had just closed, the chapter where I had been exhausted in the role of the child who carried the burden. I stepped out of the restaurant, the door shutting behind me like a heavy period at the end of a sentence. The faint sound of piano music still drifted out, mingling with the laughter that had been stifled by the tension of moments before. The Palo Alto night wind brushed against me, making the skirt of my blue dress ripple gently. I stood still for a few seconds on the stone-paved sidewalk, drawing in a deep breath, trying to steady the frantic pounding of my heart. Tonight, for the first time in my life, I had not stayed silent. For the first time, I had stood up and spoken everything aloud, but with it came a severing. My father's, "Get out," still echoed in my mind like a knife carved deep, and I knew I had just been officially stripped of the title of daughter. A few colleagues and friends hurried after me. Claire, my closest friend from the MBA program, grasped my hand, her eyes a mixture of worry and pride. "Harper, are you okay? I've never seen you so strong." Another colleague shook his head gently and said, "They don't deserve you. We saw everything." "We know." Their words of comfort made my eyes sting, but I only smiled in gratitude. I didn't want to cry anymore. Tears had been too cheap in my family, and now I wanted to save my pride for myself. Then I walked on alone down the long street, my heels striking steadily against the pavement, each sound confirming the resolve that had just solidified inside me. I would cut ties completely. When I reached my small apartment, I turned on the light, set my bag down on the table, and collapsed onto the sofa. Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. I looked around and realized that every single thing in this apartment, from the little dining table to the bookshelf, was the result of my own effort, not anyone's handout. That sense of self-reliance coursed through me like new strength. I stood up, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. The pale glow of the screen lit up my face, reflecting the image of a Harper who was weary but whose eyes burned with determination. I logged into my bank account, each expense line appearing clearly on the screen. Mortgage, $1,050 a month. Utilities, $280 a month. Insurance, $450 a month. Tuition transfer, $1,200 a month. Credit card payment, $700 a month. All of it regular, precise, mechanical, as if I had been born solely to fuel the machinery of my family's life. I stared at those numbers and felt as though I was watching the years of my youth being drained away. Then, with one click at a time, I began canceling each auto payment. Every press of cancel rang like a bell of liberation inside me. Mortgage canceled, utilities canceled, insurance canceled, credit card canceled. What remained were only the expenses that belonged to me. At last, I had stripped away the invisible chains that had held me captive for so many years. I didn't stop there. I logged into the insurance system and sent an email. As of today, I will no longer be the payer for contract number INSCA30588714. Please contact the policyholder directly to update payment information. I went into the tuition portal and removed my credit card from Elisa's account. I opened the banking app on my phone and blocked the secondary card my parents had always used. Each of these small actions, just a few clicks, felt like cutting through another link of the chain that had imprisoned me in the role of my family's walking wallet. Leaning back in my chair, I exhaled a long, steady breath. A strange quietness spread through me. No more reminder notifications, no more bills hanging over my head. I opened a blank document and typed out a few words to etch my resolve in writing. If they believe I am not family, then from this moment on, I will live exactly as they say. I have no obligation to save a family that has never once considered me their own. That night, I sat by the apartment window, looking out at Palo Alto's streets as the headlights stretched into a river of light. For the first time in years, I felt weightless, as if I had finally set down a backpack full of stones. I took a sip of leftover red wine from the dinner, closed my eyes, and let the quiet seep into every cell. I whispered to myself, "Harper, from now on, this life is yours. No one gets to control you, no one gets to belittle you. You've paid more than enough." And in that moment, I knew I had made the best decision of my life, the decision to cut ties. Not just with the money, but with the expectations, the wounds, the cutting words. I ended my role as the invisible provider. Tomorrow morning, chaos would erupt, but I wasn't afraid. Because for the first time, I would be living for myself. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds and fell across my small room. I opened my eyes with the afterglow of the night before still lingering, a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I turned on the coffee machine and breathed in deeply as the rich aroma filled the quiet apartment. But within minutes, the calm shattered. My phone started vibrating nonstop. Call after call, messages piling up, notifications pinging so rapidly the screen glowed. I knew the storm had begun. The first text was from my mother. "Harper, why was the electricity bill returned? They said service will be cut in 48 hours. What did you do?" Another followed immediately. "The insurance is canceled. They said payment failed. Your father is furious, call back now." I glanced over them and took a measured sip of coffee. At the same time, a new email from the bank appeared. "Mortgage payment failed. Please contact us to update your payment method." Then a notice from the utility company. "Please note, service will be interrupted if payment is not received within 72 hours. Their entire lives had been sustained by the constant flow of money from me, and now that stream had been cut off, every link in their chain was beginning to collapse. I could picture the scene in my parents' house that morning, my father slamming the table, shouting in anger, while my mother wept and frantically made phone calls. From the kitchen to the living room, the house must have been drowning in chaos. I smiled faintly, realizing that my silence was the strongest form of resistance I could have chosen. By mid-morning, Elisa posted a long status on Facebook. "I can't believe my sister could be so selfish as to cut off all support just because of a little sulking at a dinner. She didn't think about the consequences, didn't think about our aging parents needing insurance, didn't think about our family." Her post quickly gathered a few pitying comments from her friends. But less than an hour later, the responses shifted. A classmate from my MBA program wrote, "Selfish? Who's the one living off more than $30,000 a year while belittling the person who provides it?" A colleague of mine left a comment. "I was there last night. I heard her father say, Paying the bills doesn't make you family. If my parents ever said that to me, I'd cut ties instantly too. Elisa's status quickly became the center of debate. My friends rallied behind me, exposing the truth my family had hidden for so long. Then my phone buzzed again. A new message from my mother read, "Harper, please listen to me. Today the water company sent notice they'll cut service in 24 hours. Your father is furious, shouting all over the house. The neighbors are starting to notice. Do you want us to lose face?" I let out a quiet laugh. After all these years, the thing they cared about most was still saving face in front of others, never once my feelings. By afternoon, the chaos had reached its peak. One of the neighbors called me. It was Aunt Martha, the kind woman next door who had often seen me arrive at my parents' house carrying bags of groceries or stacks of bills. Her voice was heavy with concern. "Harper, do you know what's happening? The police just came to your parents' house." My brow furrowed in surprise. "The police? Why?" Martha sighed. "Your parents were arguing so loudly that a neighbor called 911, thinking it was domestic violence. When the officers arrived, they discovered the water had already been shut off. Your father was shouting at the utility workers right there in the yard. The whole neighborhood saw it. People are talking nonstop." I sat in silence for a few seconds, picturing the scene. My father, face crimson, yelling across the driveway, my mother weeping, the water company's staff embarrassed and cornered. Police officers standing by as witnesses, neighbors whispering among themselves. It was the very spectacle I had prevented for years by paying those bills. Now, the truth could no longer be hidden. For the first time, they were tasting what it felt like when the world collapsed and no one was left behind to clean it up. Elisa kept calling me. When I didn't pick up, she left a long voicemail. "Do you really think you've won? You've destroyed everything. Mom and Dad are falling apart. The house is at risk of foreclosure. Do you even realize what you've done? All of this just because you wanted attention." I listened, but I didn't reply. A part of me ached, but another part remained calm. I knew this wasn't destruction, it was the truth finally coming to light. For years, they had leaned on me but never once acknowledged it. Now that I had pulled my hands away, they had nothing left to cling to. That evening, I sat in front of my laptop, quietly scrolling through the flood of new notifications. Another email reminder from the bank. An official notice from the insurance company confirming the policy had been canceled. A message from the power company stating the shut-off order had been scheduled. Everything came crashing down, brick after brick, tearing apart the wall I had spent years holding up. But instead of fear, I felt relief. I knew I owed them nothing anymore. I had paid the price long enough. Out there, in the house where I grew up, I could imagine the shouting, the accusations, even the curses being thrown at my name. But I no longer heard them. I chose silence. I poured myself another glass of wine and sat by the window, gazing down at the city lights. It felt as though the whole city was moving forward, while my family remained trapped in the chaos of their own making. And in that moment, I found myself smiling. That chaos, after all, was not revenge, it was simply the truth revealed. The truth that I had never been seen as a member of the family, even though I had paid to keep them afloat. And now, with the payments gone, they finally understood who had been holding everything together all along. On Monday morning, as I walked into the office, the San Francisco sky was unusually clear. I wore a simple charcoal gray suit, stepped into the tall glass building, and carried with me a quiet determination. After a week of upheaval, I had prepared myself for anything, but I hadn't expected the day to come so soon. Barely 10 minutes after settling at my desk, I heard a commotion at the reception area. A colleague rushed in, his face uneasy. "Harper, I think your parents are outside, they're making a scene." I froze for a moment, a sharp pang tightening in my chest, but then a wave of calm washed over me. I knew this moment was inevitable. When I stepped into the hallway, the scene before me froze the entire office. My father, Richard, was standing in the middle of the reception area, his face flushed crimson, his voice echoing as he shouted. My mother, Eleanor, clung to his arm with tears streaming down her face, crying out my name between sobs. The receptionist looked helpless, while security guards stood at attention, waiting for instructions. My colleagues, on their way to the conference room, had all stopped in their tracks, their eyes wide as they witnessed the spectacle. The moment my father saw me, he lunged forward, jabbing his finger in my face, his voice hissing with fury. "You destroyed this family, Harper. Everything we had is collapsing because of you." His roar reverberated through the lobby, loud enough that a few clients who had just walked in paused to watch. I drew in a deep breath and kept my voice steady. "No, Father. It was your words, paying the bills doesn't make you family, that destroyed this family. I only did exactly what you told me to do." The space fell into silence. I heard whispers ripple behind me. "Paying the bills doesn't make you family? Did he really say that?" My father's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing as though scrambling for a retort, but his eyes burned with helpless anger that only betrayed him further. My mother rushed in, her voice pleading. "Harper, please reconsider. Your father and I have grown used to relying on you. Now, everything is falling apart. Do you really want to see us out on the streets?" I looked at her, and for a fleeting second, I felt a scratch of pain in my chest. But just as quickly, memories flooded back, the forgotten birthdays, the nights I burned with fever and received nothing more than a text reminding me to pay the insurance. I shook my head gently. I don't want to see anyone on the streets, but I also cannot keep being treated like a walking wallet. I've given far too much, and the only thing I ever got back was contempt. Now it's enough. Every eye in the lobby turned toward me. I stood tall, neither trembling nor lowering my head. In that moment, I no longer felt like the little daughter in the family, but like an adult who had every right to set boundaries for her own life. My father stepped closer, growling. "You owe us. If it weren't for us, you never would have gone to school, never would have made it to Stanford." I gave a cold smile. "If it weren't for me, you would have lost the house, lost the insurance, lost everything. I don't owe anyone anything. On the contrary, it's you who owe me a thank you you've never once spoken in your entire lives." Whispers rippled again through the office. I saw my colleagues looking at me with respect shining in their eyes. One of the company directors, standing nearby, gave a small nod, his expression solemn and approving. My parents, on the other hand, fell silent, their faces stiff and pale. My words were like the final blade, cutting through the last fragile thread that bound us. I turned to the security guards and spoke clearly. "Please escort them out. This is a workplace, and I will not allow my colleagues to be disturbed any further." The guards stepped forward, polite but firm, and guided my parents toward the exit. My father made a last attempt to resist, but my mother pulled at his arm, her red-rimmed eyes showing that she understood they had no power here. As they were led away, I stood still, watching, without adding another word. My heart felt heavy, but at the same time strangely free. For the first time in my life, I had set a boundary that could not be crossed. When the lobby doors closed behind them, the office fell quiet for a few moments before slowly returning to its usual rhythm. A colleague walking past gave me a gentle pat on the shoulder, another whispered, "You're so strong." I smiled faintly and returned to my desk. Inside me there was sadness, but also a new strength, the strength that comes from protecting yourself. I knew that from this day forward, family defined by blood was gone, but I also knew that my real family would be built from the people who saw me and valued me for who I am. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and wrote a short email to my parents. "From now on, if you wish to contact me, please send an email instead of showing up unannounced. I will only respond if our conversations are conducted with respect. Otherwise, I will be forced to cut off all communication entirely." I hit send and closed the computer. In that moment, I knew I had truly severed the tie. No more pleading phone calls, no more cycles of tears followed by shouting. It was over. That evening, I sat by my apartment window, the city lights glowing brilliantly below. I sipped my glass of wine, feeling light and unburdened. I knew that somewhere out there my parents were seething, and Elisa was either crying or pointing fingers. But I also knew that once the truth was revealed, there was no turning back. And I, Harper Moore, had finally broken free from the invisible chains that had bound me for so many years. In the days following the confrontation at the office, I kept my word. I did not answer a single call from my parents or from Elisa. Occasionally, my inbox would light up with long-winded emails, swinging between anger that accused me of being selfish and desperate pleas with promises that things would change. I read them, but never replied. I understood that any sign of weakness on my part would drag me back into the same vicious cycle. And so, in silence, a new chapter for my family began, a chapter in which I was no longer the one holding everything together. News of my parents reached me through old acquaintances and a few relatives. Within just a few weeks, the spacious suburban house they had once flaunted with pride was listed for an urgent sale. They could no longer cover the mortgage, now 2 payments overdue. I heard that my father had tried negotiating with the bank, but when the account manager handed him a printout of the payment history with every installment over the past 5 years bearing my name, he sat in silence, his face burning red. Neighbors, who had once regarded my family as the model household with 2 daughters at prestigious schools, now whispered, so it was Harper all along. Without her, they couldn't even keep their house. The pride my parents had polished like gold crumbled in just a matter of days. At the same time, my mother was forced to sell off the jewelry she had always paraded as her precious dowry. I still remember when I was little, she would take out that velvet box, place each piece into Elisa's hands to admire, and say, "One day, when you get married, I'll pass these down to you." Now, one by one, every bracelet, every pair of earrings was carried to the pawnshop. Even the diamond wedding ring, something she once proudly called an irreplaceable symbol of love, was not spared. Aunt Martha later told me that when my mother walked out of the pawn shop, her eyes swollen red, the entire neighborhood was whispering. Elisa fared no better. The law firm job my parents had boasted about so proudly to everyone lasted only a few months. The truth was, Elisa had never been serious. As long as she had me and our parents shielding her, she could spend her time on social parties, shopping sprees, and weekend getaways. But once every expense was suddenly cut off, her immaturity was laid bare. She was frequently late, missed deadlines, and eventually was let go. In that moment, all the proud declarations of, "She is the true pride of our family," evaporated. She returned home unemployed, another weight pressing down on my already crumbling parents. My family began living through days they had never imagined. Their car was repossessed when they failed to make the loan payments. Electricity and water were cut off repeatedly, each time restored with humiliation. They were forced to move into a cramped apartment in a working-class neighborhood, a far cry from the elegant suburban house they once flaunted. I heard that once, my father passed by that old house now belonging to new owners and stood silently at the gate for a long time before walking away. Perhaps only then did he truly begin to understand what loss felt like. Meanwhile, I continued down my own path. At the consulting firm, the uproar caused by my parents that day, instead of embarrassing me, made people see me differently. They saw resilience in me, the courage to set boundaries. A few directors even approached me to say how impressed they were by my composure, by the way I remained calm and in control despite the provocation. Because of that, I was selected to join a major project in New York. Just 6 months later, I officially received an offer to transfer to headquarters and take on a managerial role at one of the top consulting centers. The day I signed my new contract, holding the plane ticket to New York in my hand, I couldn't help but think back to all the long nights I had stayed awake because of my family. Without those years, perhaps I wouldn't have learned resilience, wouldn't have found the drive to fight so relentlessly. I smiled to myself. In the end, those wounds had become the very foundation that allowed me to rise. The relatives who used to gather at my parents' house gradually drifted away, partly out of embarrassment, partly because they didn't want to be entangled in financial troubles. At the rare family gatherings, no one asked my parents anymore about their 2 talented daughters. The silence must have cut deeper than any reproach. I took no joy in hearing that, but I understood it was the inevitable result of years spent clinging to illusions and pride. A year passed, and I finally settled in New York. In my new apartment overlooking Central Park, I hosted a small gathering. Friends, close colleagues, and even my grandfather, the only member of my family who had ever truly believed in me, were there. They brought flowers, bottles of wine, and words of genuine congratulations. Sitting in that circle of warmth, I felt with certainty this was family. Not the people who shared my blood but never once acknowledged me, but the ones who chose to stand by me, who saw me, who lifted me up. As I raised my glass, a memory struck me. Back in that old house, every time my father received a bill I had paid, his only response was a curt, "Yeah, good," never once a thank you. But now, here I was, surrounded by people who valued every effort I made, who celebrated my success wholeheartedly. In that moment, I realized that true worth never comes from reluctant recognition, but from genuine love. And that was my greatest awakening. A few weeks before the New York gathering, I received a handwritten letter from my parents. The handwriting was messy, the words wavering somewhere between apology and reproach. "We know we were wrong, but you shouldn't be so heartless. Come home this Christmas. We are still a family." When I finished reading, I folded the paper and set it aside. I no longer felt anger, but neither did I hold any expectation. I wrote a brief email in return. "Until there is a genuine apology, we cannot call ourselves a family." Then I pressed send, without waiting for a reply. Inside me, a calm settled. Real family is not defined by who shares your blood, but by who sees you and values you. I had lost a family by blood, but I had found a true family, a family of choice. And to me, that was worth more than any amount of money. On a winter evening in New York, my new apartment glowed in the warmth of golden lights. Through the wide glass windows overlooking Central Park, the clusters of streetlights and the glow of skyscrapers painted a dazzling scene. Inside, the small dinner table was neatly set with a white cloth, surrounded by the laughter of friends, colleagues, and my grandfather, the people who had become my true family. A year earlier, on the night of my MBA graduation, I had walked out of a restaurant in bitterness, leaving behind shouts and humiliating words. And now, as I raised my glass of wine in the home I built for myself, I knew my life had turned to an entirely new page. My grandfather sat at the corner of the table, his gentle eyes fixed on me before he gave a small nod, as if to say, "I always knew you would make it." Beside him was Claire, my closest friend from the MBA program, the one who had witnessed every ounce of strength I showed on that fateful night. My colleagues from the consulting firm, the same people who had patted my shoulder in support after the chaos in the office lobby, now laughed and told stories, saying they had never seen anyone face their own family with such composure. I sat among them, my heart warm. Tonight, I no longer needed to chase the approving glance of my parents, no longer needed to cling to a bond that had always been laced with contempt. Tonight, I could simply rest in the comfort of genuine love. When everyone had settled, I stood, raised my glass, and let my voice ring clear. A year ago, I was thrown out of my own graduation dinner after hearing my parents tell me, "Paying the bills doesn't make you family." Those words once shattered me, but they also became the turning point that revealed the truth. Family is not the people who take from you, but the ones who see you, value you, and stand with you even when you have nothing left to give. I lost one family, but I found another, the family that is real. The room fell silent for a few seconds before it erupted into applause. Claire wiped her eyes, my grandfather smiled with quiet pride, and my colleagues raised their glasses in a toast. I looked around, and my heart swelled with a peace I had longed for all my life. A few days before the dinner, I received a letter from my parents. In it, they wrote lines that wavered between apology and reproach. "We know we were wrong, but you shouldn't be so heartless. Come home this Christmas, because after all, we are still a family." I read it carefully. A part of me wanted to respond, to reach for some form of reconciliation. But then I remembered everything: the birthdays forgotten, the nights I burned with fever only to receive a text reminding me to pay the insurance, the countless times I was compared to Elisa even on my most important days. And I realized I no longer needed that kind of validation. So I wrote a short email. Until there is a sincere apology, we cannot call ourselves a family. Then I pressed send. No more guilt, no more expectation. Tonight, at this small gathering, I realized I had come full circle. I once believed family was unshakable, that blood mattered above all else. But the truth is, sometimes the people who share your blood are the very ones who wound you the deepest. And sometimes, complete strangers through sincerity and compassion become the pillars you never imagined you could lean on. Family is not something you are given, it is something you choose. I sat down, listening to the lively conversation, the clinking of glasses. A younger colleague leaned in and whispered, "Harper, you've taught me an important lesson. You have to set boundaries, even with the people closest to you." I smiled and nodded. That's right, because if you don't protect yourself, no one else will. Outside, the winter wind swept through the park, but inside my apartment, the air was warm, like being held in an embrace. I tilted my glass of wine gently, watching the light shimmer across the deep red liquid. In my heart, I whispered to myself, "Harper, you've walked through hell, but you came out and found your own little heaven." My story ends here, not with tears, but with a peaceful smile. I know that out there, many people have felt invisible in their own families, have given everything until they were empty, and still were never recognized. If you are listening to this story and see yourself in it, please remember, you are not alone. Real family is not about who shares your blood, but about the ones who choose to stay, who truly see you, and who lift you up. And now I want to ask you, the one listening. Have you ever been dismissed or belittled by your own family, left wondering whether you truly belonged? If so, tell me where you are watching from. So I will know that in this journey of searching for a true family, I am not alone. Thank you for listening.